We're going to leave the last few minutes of this conversation, take you live to the Center for American Progress in Washington, D.C. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu making remarks.
Mr. Prime Minister, Mrs. Netanyahu, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming to the Center for American Progress to engage in a dialogue on a range of issues, including many areas of concern to progressives as well as all Americans. Well, we have disagreed on some issues, including the Iran nuclear deal. We also believe deeply that the U.S.-Israel relationship is vital. That relationship is critical to both of our countries, particularly as the Middle East becomes a more unstable and dangerous region. While this bond has faced some strains in recent years, we believe strongly that conversations like this one are an important opportunity to strengthen it. Scholars at the Center have studied this region very closely. We believe peace can and must be found for Israelis and Palestinians so that both peoples can live with real dignity and security. It will take hard work to build mutual confidence and negotiate difficult compromises, and we really understand that. As Prime Minister, we thank you for taking questions here because the choices you make matter profoundly to Israel's future and the future of the region. And we believe that matters profoundly to America. Would you like to make some statements?
Thank you. It reminds me of the Israeli ambassador who came back to Ben Gurion Airport and said, "You have anything to declare?" And he said, "Yes, I'd like to say that I'm very happy to be back home. And yes, I'd like to make a declaration. First, I understand that you understand that I have a sore throat, but I'm sure you'll discover I haven't lost my voice. That I guarantee you. Secondly, I know that my visit here has been a source of some controversy. So I doubly appreciate the invitation, and I think everything that you said is something that is crucial and important. I came here third because I think it's vital to understand how important it is for me that Israel remain an issue of bipartisan consensus. It's crucial. That is, it's a source. The relationship with the United States, all parts of the United States and the American people, is a strategic asset to our national security and our future. And that is the third reason why I'm happy to be here. And the fourth reason is something else. I'd like to talk to a progressive audience about progressive values. I think that Israel is at the very least misunderstood, because I think that if you look at all the values and all the rights that you deem important, I'm talking about the rights of women or the rights of gays or the rights of minorities, the rights of Arabs, the rights of Jews, the rights of people. These are enshrined in an imperfect society. Israel is not perfect. I don't know any society that is. The one that is facing incredible odds with incredible successes. And it safeguards those values in a very, very troubled area. So I'd like to talk about those values. I'd like to talk about our quest for peace. And I'd like to talk about why that quest for peace has not yet been achieved. And I hope you'll ask me questions on all of these things and anything else that you want. I have a rule when people come to interview me. So here's what I do, and I broke my rule because I didn't have it here. It's not my office. But in my office, I put out a whiteboard. And anybody who asks a question, I write it down. And I go through all the questions. And if I don't want to answer it, I say, I don't want to answer. I want you to know I'm fudging that one. But at least everybody knows if I've answered their questions or not. And I hope I'll answer all of your questions. And I thank you for this invitation. Thank you.
Thank you.
End of declaration.
Thank you. I think I'll follow up on some of the issues you raised for sure. Obviously, you had a meeting with the president yesterday. There's been some disagreements between you and the president, but I hope you can share with us just a little bit of the flavor of that meeting and what concrete steps came out of it.
It was a very good meeting. I'm not saying it lip service. It was a very good meeting. The President and I have had over a dozen meetings, I think. He's had more meetings with me than with any other head of any other leader, and I deeply appreciate that. I think the time that he's invested, the importance that he attaches to this relationship, I think is unique. We've had our disagreement, particularly over Iran, that's clear, but I think we have no disagreement now about what we need to do moving forward. Three things. Number one, hold Iran's feet to the fire, make sure they abide by their obligations. Two, work to block Iran's aggression and terror in the region. There are others in the region who practice terror and aggression, like ISIS. We should work together to counter both. And third, work against Iran's international terror network that is now spreading to two hemispheres. So the President and I focused yesterday on an MOU that is a long-term understanding between Israel and the United States on American military assistance to Israel that is critical for us, and I appreciated his willingness not only to move forward on that, but also on assuring Israel's qualitative military edge. Because as you know, there are other countries in the region that are receiving tremendous amount of military assistance, and it's very important that Israel always has, if not the quantitative edge, the qualitative edge to be able to defend itself by itself against any threat. That's a principle the President has repeated many times, and I appreciate it at all times, but especially at this time.
In your opening remarks, Mr. Prime Minister, you mentioned Israeli values and the idea of a democracy and the fact that there are Arabs. There are Arabs who live and work and are citizens of Israel. We appreciate that you've come here to speak about some of the tough issues that have come up in the past. And one incident that really did strike a nerve with many progressives was statements made during the recent election. And I just want to quote, where it was said, you said Arab voters are coming out in droves to the polls. I think people were a little taken aback by that. So what do you say to progressives in the United States who worry about comments like that and what it means for an inclusive Israel?
Well, I think that this statement, as it was said, was wrong. Because, first of all, you should know that Arabs voted for me, and I welcome that. In fact, you may check this, but I think they voted for me in considerably larger numbers than they voted for the Labour Party. I was not referring to going to votes. I was speaking about a specific list that was opposed, but it shouldn't have been said. A few days after the election, I called in the Arab leaders and Arab leaders to the Prime Minister's residence, and I said, I'm the Prime Minister of each of you. And I don't want that statement to go uncorrected. I corrected it. I made sure that they understand it. Now, this is words. What about deeds? What about deeds? You know, I'll tell you what happened when I first was elected Prime Minister in 1996. It's my fourth term. There's a flood. You know, floods in Israel. And there's an Arab village called Furadis. Furadis gets flooded because they don't have these tunnels. You know, they're not tunnels, but sewage tunnels, yeah. And the whole village is underwater. And I went to see it, and I said, God, that's awful. How come this is like this? And said, it's always been like that. I said, it's not going to be like it. And I said, I put in, I don't know, 30, 40 million shekels, and they built this tunnel, and there's not been a flood in Furadis. They said, but Prime Minister, they're not going to vote for you. I said, so what? And then I proceeded in my administrations to give billions of shekels to the Arab sector in order to reduce the gaps, in order to put infrastructure, in order to put in a tremendous amount of education, transportation inside the Arab villages. They can't get to work because there's no internal transportation in the Arab communities. It's unbelievable. I changed that. Put in a lot of money. Putting the Arab citizens, giving them programs to enter the high-tech sector. And I do this personally. So we did all of that. After the election, this is now my 4th term, we put in close to 1 billion shekels. Now, just now, with this same Arab parties, the leaders of this same Arab party. So I'm the prime minister of all the citizens of Israel, those who voted for me, those who didn't vote for me, Jews, Arabs, Druze, Circassians, Muslims, Christians. And I think the words and the numbers speak for themselves. I think it's worthwhile, since you have scholars here, to investigate that. Look at the relative investments of different governments, and and you'll discover the truth of what I'm saying here. I think that's important. It comes also from the political philosophy, you'd be surprised to hear, that I follow, especially the teachings of Zev Jabotinsky, who believed in the idea of an egalitarian state. He said, there in the Jewish state will flourish the son of Arabia, the son of Nazareth, and my own son. That's what I believe in.
Now, turning to the future, I'd like to ask you really how you see Israel in 2 decades. How do you see Israel and its borders? Do you envision that Israel will continue to occupy the West Bank and control Gaza in 20 years? How do you see the future?
It depends on what happens in the future in the Middle East, what happens in the world. There is a great convulsion taking place, and that convulsion is of monumental proportion. It's really a battle between modernity and early medievalism. I was going to say medievalism, but my father was a great scholar of the Middle Ages, and this is early medievalism, and a very, very primitive and violent movement that shakes the entire Arab and Muslim world, has so far taken its toll primarily in Muslim lives in Syria, almost 300,000 dead and millions displaced, but elsewhere as well. I can't tell you what'll happen. I think ultimately medievalism loses, and I think modernity wins. That's usually been the case in the great battles with these fanatic ideologies. Nazism lost, but before it went down, it took with it 50, 60 million people, a third of my own people. Militant Islam will go down. I'm quite confident of that. I don't think it can compete with the desire for freedom or the technology of freedom, even though they're using it right now. They're using the internet, they're using other things against the other forces, but ultimately they are in the business of constraining choices, constraining information. So I think ultimately they lose. What will happen? Will they lose in the next 20 years? I don't know. But I think what we have to make sure is that we're around. It gives us no succor and no encouragement to have militant Islam defeated and the Jewish state disappear. We don't want to go through a repetition of the other tragedies. So how do we prevent that? First of all, we have to make sure that the state of Israel is strong, is robust. It's definitely robust. I was prime minister on the 50th anniversary, and I may very well be prime minister on the 70th anniversary. That's a few years away. And I'll tell you what happened in the 20 years. And that may be a good guide to what will happen in the next 20 years. Israel has turned into a technological powerhouse. We're in a century of knowledge and a century of conceptual products with geometric growth. And Israel is growing geometrically by design. We've created a very friendly economy for this growth. This is a number I always give because I think it's so striking. In 2014, Israel received 10% of the global investment in cybersecurity. In 2015, that number doubled. We're receiving 20% of the investment of the world in cybersecurity. That's an astounding figure. It also shows exponential growth. And I think we'll continue that trend, to ensure that Israel grows technologically. The future belongs to those who innovate. Another example, water. We've solved our water problem, even though rainfall has roughly been halved since the year of our independence. Population has grown 10 times, and our GDP per capita has grown 40 times. Yet we have water surpluses because we're the #1 recycler of water in the world. We recycle roughly 90% of our water, our wastewater. The next runner-up, Spain, 25%. So we have the capacity to shape the future. Now here's what is happening as a result of that. The first thing is, because nations understand that the future belongs to those who innovate, we are getting alliances, a lot of alliances. We are, this may not be understood in Western Europe, but here's what is happening. I'm so isolated that as foreign minister and prime minister, I don't have time to see my own Knesset members, my own factions, or the other politicians, because I have diplomats and heads of state coming from Asia, from Africa, from Latin America, and they all want three things. They all want three things. I mean, I'm talking about small countries like China or India, where I'm going to be going soon to visit, or Japan, or 20 African states that have come in. They all say, come back, come back, come back, or countries in Latin America. They all want three things. First, Israeli technology. Second, Israeli technology. Third, Israeli technology. This is a fundamental change, a fundamental change that will accelerate in the next 20 years. So Israel, I think, in the knowledge century, is uniquely poised to multiply its capacities. Can we get peace with the Palestinians, which is what you're asking me?
Yes.
It depends, one. Yeah, we're going to talk about that more. I just wanted to get I wanted to get my commercial in so you understand how great an investment Israel is. Remember the joke? How do you make a big fortune, a small fortune in Israel? Start with a big fortune? No. No.
Apparently they have not heard this.
No, it's changed. You make big fortunes in Israel. But the important thing is, how do we change our fortune with our Palestinian neighbors? Why is it that we don't have peace? Why? Well, is it this government? Is it me? There were 5 other prime ministers since Oslo, since the peace process began. How come they didn't make peace? Well, the reason they didn't make peace is because the underlying problem preventing peace is not Israel's willingness to make a territorial compromise, even a very generous one. It's that after Gaza, Israelis ask a question. What happens when we set up a Palestinian state on the other side? Do we get a state that lives in peace with us, or do we get a state that seeks to destroy us and fires thousands of rockets on our heads? Israel went through the book. It went by the book. It left Gaza to the last square centimeter. It took away all the settlements, skip freeze, just took them apart. It even disinterred people from their graves, handed the keys over to Abu Mazen, who promptly lost it to Hamas, even though they were only 3,000 strong then and he had 15,000 troops. They kicked him out. Now we have 30,000 Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and they fired, I don't know, 15,000, 16,000 rockets on Israel from Gaza since. The same thing happened to us in Lebanon. We left Lebanon to the last square inch. We got not Hamas, we got another proxy of Iran, Hezbollah, and they fired about 15,000 rockets on us. So Israelis ask a simple question, which I ask. If we were to set up a Palestinian state, how do we make sure that that state does not become another Gaza and is not committed to our destruction and doesn't work to our destruction? The answer to that falls into 2 categories. One, and these are not conditions for entering talks. I have no conditions for entering talks. I'm willing to meet up. You should invite Abu Mazen here. That's what you really should do. You should invite him and me. I'm sitting here. I'm willing to wait. Knesset can wait. Fine. We'll see if he comes. I am willing to enter the talks without any conditions. And for the last 7 years, Abu Mazen deigned to talk to me for 6 hours. 6 hours. That's it. How could you make progress on the issues I'm going to talk about in a minute if you won't meet and talk? That doesn't mean that the charges aren't leveled at us. They always are. But I'm talking about facts. These are facts. Now, in order to avoid another Gaza, which is the opposite of peace, you need two things. First, you have to make sure that the Palestinian state that is formed is not committed to Israel's destruction, that it ends all demands, recognizes Israel, and doesn't seek to flood it with the descendants of refugees, any more than I would seek to flood the Palestinian state with the descendants of settlers. Do you agree, Mr. Abbas? Refuses to answer that. That's what we mean by a nation state of the Jewish people. Palestinians go there, if they choose, and Jews go to Israel, if they choose. Can we have that arrangement? Mutual recognition of two nation states. That's the first term. The second thing is, what happens if things go awry? What happens if this territory is taken over, the way Gaza was taken over? Then we need a long-term security presence of Israel to assure that doesn't happen. And right now, I don't see any other force. I don't see any other force. I mean, who's going to do it? Austrian peacekeepers? We tried that on the Golan Heights. These two conditions of mutual recognition and security arrangements, I think, do we see that likely right now in the immediate future? No. Is this the right formula, I think, down the line? Yes. Can it happen? I don't think the Palestinians will necessarily accept it by themselves, but I think because of the change that is happening in the region, because there's a huge change happening in the region, it might be that leading Arab countries might encourage a future Palestinian leadership, or even this one, to accept that kind of deal. And if that happened, I think Israelis would go for it. They'd go for something that they thought was mutual recognition and that was secure.
You know, with respect, I think a lot of progressives think, not only in the U.S. but around the world, that Israel isn't currently acting neutrally. That it has been acting. It has been acting vis-a-vis peace, and it has been acting through the advancement, the expansion of settlements, the idea that there's been a steady growth of settlements that are strategically placed. The understanding is strategically placed in order to make a Palestinian state more difficult, or that it has that result. What do you say to those concerns that the settlement expansion is actually something that's making peace more difficult?
Well, I think two things. First, factually, the there have been no new settlements built in the last 20 years, and even before I became Prime Minister the first time. The additions are in existing communities. The map doesn't materially change. By the way, Google this, because this is just repeated ad nauseum, so it assumes the cachet of self-evident truth that they were gobbling up land and so on. We're not gobbling up land because it doesn't take up any land. I mean, the total amount of built-up land is just a few percent. And the addition, if you look at over time, the addition, it's got to be a fraction of a percent, maybe 1/10 of 1%, 2/10 of 1%, maybe I'm wrong, maybe 3/10 of 1%. That's the land that is being gobbled up. That's a factual question. That should not be something that is debated. And yet it's become an axiom that we are gobbling up land. We're not, simply because it doesn't happen. But here's what the actual statistics of construction are. Barak built 5,000 units a year. Sharon built 1,800 units a year. Olmert built 1,700 units a year. And my government, this doesn't help me back home, has built 1,500 units a year. That's a fact, okay? That's not subject to question. Statistics, government statistics, In our case, our statistics, by the way, are not in any way influenced by political manipulation. This is an independent authority, and it was quoted in one of the papers that most support me, Haaretz. It's a fact. Okay, so here's the two things that I'm saying. One, the settlements are there. The growth in the settlements does not materially affect the potential map for peace. And third, I think that it's an issue that can be resolved, but I don't think it's the core issue. The reason it's not the core issue is that it wasn't a core issue in Gaza either. So what's the problem? The problem, look, my grandfather, I always say this, I think I date the conflict back to 1920. My grandfather came in a boat in 1920, landed in Jaffa, went to the immigration depot, the Jewish immigration office in Jaffa. That office was hit a few months later by Arab attackers. They killed 6 or 7 Jews, including a famous writer, Brenner, great writer. And then we had riots and attacks in 1921, 1929 on the ancient Jewish community of Hebron, 1936 to 1939, 3 years, and 1947, of course, and 1948, the partition. There was no territories. There was no settlements. And then this continued into 1967, when we had a noose of death placed around us. This is 50 years, 47 years, from 1920 to 1967. Half a century. What's the cause of this? It can't be the settlements, because it can't be the territories, because there weren't any. Now we get in there, leave Gaza, and they keep on attacking us. And I'm telling you that the real issue is whether the Palestinians are divided, one half living in Gaza, overtaken by the militant Islamists, openly calls for a destruction, and the other half in the West Bank refuses to confront them. And when I say to Abu Mazen, I say, okay, for God's sake, recognize the Jewish state already, as I recognize the Palestinian state. And for God's sake, let's talk about long-term security arrangements, so we have those two anchors for real peace. He won't do it. The settlements can be resolved within that context, easily. Easily. Well, not that easily, but not that hard either.
But I think one of the issues really is, you say that there have been 1,500 a year. Mm-hmm. I hear that they're less. But why continue with them?
People live there. People live there. Look, they're human beings. You don't say, well, all the firstborn, throw them on the other side of the green line. I mean, they're living there. They're living in 3 blocks primarily. That's where most of the construction's taking place. This is not foreign land. I know it's comfortable to say that this is the Belgian Congo. For God's sake, Jews have been living there for 4,000 years. So are Arabs. I don't say we throw you out. There's a massive Arab construction, massive, massive, that is against Oslo. It's not important right now. And nobody says, how come they're building there in disputed lands? Nobody even dares to think that. And yet the Jews are somehow, there's this ethnic cleansing idea. What is this ethnic cleansing business? Why do we have in Israel Arabs living in the Galilee, having in the Negev, everywhere, in the Knesset, in the Supreme Court, full civic rights, not a perfect society, but in the Middle East, the only ones who enjoy the rights of a democratic society. Nobody questions that, and we don't question it, certainly I don't. Yet the idea of a Palestinian state, it's got to be Judenrein, it's got to be clean, there can't be any Jews there. What is this? What kind of standard is this that we accept and the world accepts and progressives accept? You don't want that. I mean, I think you should ask these questions to the core. It's like, I see gays for Gaza, or I don't know, gays for Iran. I said, you're supporting, not you. The people who do that are supporting the people who would murder them. They hang gays on cranes in Iran. If you're gay in Gaza, your fate is sealed.
Yeah, no. I should say, I appreciate, we're not, no one's making equivalence between the rights.
What I'm saying is, and forgive me for being so clear about it, I think there's something fundamentally wrong. Fundamentally wrong. Israel wants peace. Israel has made enormous sacrifices for peace. I've made the 2 states for 2 people statement in Bar Ilan University. in a religious university. Abu Mazen has not yet made the Birzeit speech. He hasn't gone to his own people and said, give up the ghost. We're not going back to Jaffa. And Israel is here to stay by right. He's not done that. I have been asked to freeze settlements. I did. No prime minister has done it before. Didn't help. For 10 months, he wouldn't come to the table. It didn't help. I did other things which were even harder, like releasing prisoners, which was probably the hardest decision I made. Didn't help. Didn't help twice. One, it didn't help them get to the table, and it didn't help launch the negotiations that we want. And second, it didn't absolve me of the blame that is attached to the Prime Minister of Israel and the government of Israel by dint of people who don't understand what is really driving this conflict. In the Middle East, what is driving the conflicts with an S is the battle between modernity and early medievalism. It is not the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Syria has collapsed, Iraq has collapsed, Yemen has collapsed, Libya has collapsed, and the other states are wobbly. And that's a larger civilizational battle. In the specific confines of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, what is driving the conflict, and unfortunately still drives the conflict, is the persistent refusal to recognize a nation state for the Jewish people in any boundaries. That remains the problem. If you want to solve a problem, address the problem. Don't address what is not the problem, address that problem. It is not settlements, it is the persistent refusal to accept the Jewish state. If you have a willingness to accept the Jewish state, you will solve the settlement problem.
I'd like to follow up on your comments just now on the region and ask you about what's happening in Syria, the recent actions by Russia, the complicated nature of the region. Obviously, it's hugely unsettling, but I'd love your views on that topic.
Well, it's a very complicated tapestry, and I think you should ask Mr. Putin why he's doing what he's doing. But I think he says that he wants to bolster that regime, if not its leader. He says that he wants to prevent Islamist fighters from going back to Russia. I went to see him.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I said, the first thing we have to make sure is that our fighter pilots don't start shooting at each other, or that we shoot down your anti-aircraft batteries. And he said, I agree with that. It's okay. So we agreed on this horrible jargon word, deconfliction.
Yeah.
Washington produces amazing things. Deconfliction is one of them, and 2 weeks later, I think there was the same procedure between the American military and the Russian military. The second thing is I said, look, Israel has not intervened in the internal battle in Syria, principally because I'm not sure which intervention is preferable, and when I'm not sure, I don't do it. But here's where we do intervene. If Syrian territory is used to fire at us, we fire back. And we've hit the Syrian army positions more than once. Secondly, if Iran wants to establish a second front along the Golan Heights, as it's established in southern Lebanon, we'll take forceful action, as we have. Third, if Iran and Hezbollah want to use Syrian territory to transfer arms, very lethal arms, from Syria to Lebanon, we'll take action, as we have. Fourth, if we don't see it, we could take action against Syrian arms that we do see. If it went through, it doesn't prevent us from, and we didn't see it going into Lebanon, we could take action in Syria to degrade the inventories that could be passed in the future. So we heard that. And I think it was a very clear conversation, and this is the policy that we are following. As far as Syria is concerned, I can't tell you if you can put Humpty Dumpty back together again. I doubt it. But if there's a solution out there that restores some calm, stops the carnage, it's fine with us, but we want to make sure that our interests are maintained in such an arrangement. That is, that this new Syria, or Syrias with an S, is not and are not used for attacks against us.
You've made the point, and you are absolutely right, you made the point here and elsewhere, that Israel is a rare democracy in a very dangerous neighborhood that shares values with democracies around the world, values like commitment to the rule of law and that no one is above the law. I just want to also say, acknowledge that we very much condemn the heinous knife attacks targeting Israelis, innocent Israelis, which continue today and in recent weeks. We were all taken with the recent story of the Israeli American working for peace who was attacked. We stand against such acts of violence, as the President said yesterday. So we stand with you in that area. Innocent Palestinians have also been killed. For example, extremists killed 3 members of a Palestinian family in an arson attack in the West Bank village of Duma this summer, including an 18-month-old baby. They have not been prosecuted. People have asked questions about that. I'd love you to just explain what's happening.
Well, when you had that attack, which is uncommon,
yes,
but is horrible, I went to the hospital, went to that baby Palestinian Arab boy, said we'd shoulder any expense to take care of the family. Unfortunately, the parents died. I did then something that no Israeli Prime Minister has done. I issued Ma'atzarim Minalim, administrative detentions on Israeli citizens. That is, you actually can put them under arrest without trial, because I thought that this is such something that we have to fight with such ferocity that I was willing to break this precedent, and we did. The problem with this is that this is not an organized network. Typically, the way you discover terrorist attacks or criminal gangs is that they have hierarchies and they have communications. So, you know, a modern state, Israel's a very modern state, cracks that sometimes quickly and sometimes over time. When you encounter something that is not structured that way, and you can have 15, 16-year-olds, we're not sure, okay, but who don't communicate, who are very clever and obviously have been, you know, have figured out where the Achilles heel is and just avoid any communications, then it's very hard to catch them. We have cracked, you know, lesser crime. Somebody did damage to a church in the Galilee. We cracked that. We cracked other acts like this, but this is the most violent act, and that's the reason we haven't cracked it, and I don't want to get into the discussion of our measures, but they are legion. And it is difficult precisely because it is not structured. That's the problem.
There's a concern that settler violence has not been prosecuted, that the vast majority of cases of settler violence against Palestinians have not been prosecuted. What do you say to that?
That's not true. We don't have a policy like that. In fact, first of all, look at the violence. Look at the relative degrees of violence. I mean, we had this horror of this particular family, but we've had families burnt, cars being Molotov cocktails, a woman walking with her husband and 2 children. The husband is knifed to death. The woman is, you know, tries to rescue her children. She's assaulted. We've had, I've seen drive-bys where, you know, rocks are thrown into passengers in the middle of Jerusalem, and the guy dies, almost goes into a ravine. I've seen horrible things, so there's no comparison. You can't hide settler violence. It's not as if they go in and they kill someone and it remains a secret. We're a country of law, we're a country of transparency, and so there's no comparison. There's no comparison. It's not symmetrical, it's not equivalent. But what is illegal is illegal. So we prosecute even if somebody paints some graffiti or if somebody takes down some olive trees. For us, this is a crime, we take it. But I would not put it on the same level as Duma. Duma is real.
Yeah, I see.
And there are many Dumas on the Palestinian side of the ledger, a lot. Every 4 hours, roughly, we have a Duma. Not Duma because they try with Molotov cocktails and other things, but they don't succeed always. So I don't think there's a symmetry there. There is no symmetry in Israeli and Palestinian societies. We do not teach our children we don't send them to suicide kindergartens, camps. We do not teach them that we have to obliterate Palestine. We do not name our public squares after mass murderers. When we had, on the few occasions we had, mass murderers like Goldstein, we excoriated it. We all condemned it, from the right to the left. But the public square of Ramallah is named after a killer who murdered hundreds of innocent Jews. There's a difference in values. They glorify these people. We don't. And so this asymmetry produces also this glorification of terror. And right now what we're seeing is a layer above that, or below that. And that is that the internet is meeting militant Islam in the hearts and minds of children and teenagers, and driving them to believe this fantastic fabrication. We're going to tear down the Al-Aqsa Mosque. We're going to build the third temple. I mean, insane. It's just insane. So you say, well, how can people believe that? Yeah, they believe that. If you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes truth. And the truth is propagated, this false truth is propagated in the minds of these people. When we have young minds poisoned, we take action. If we haven't found the Duma people, it'll take time, but we'll get them. I'm much more concerned on how to get to Palestinian young minds. One, to disabuse them of these lies, and second, to get them to accept the idea that we're going to have to live side by side in this small piece of land, and we're going to have to do it in peace and prosperity. That's a tough order, because I don't think that their political leadership is ready yet to embrace this. I think that's the toughest obstacle there is.
We're going to get to questions. I'm going to ask one last question. People should get ready. And the questions, I'll just say now, need to be questions. Everyone should identify themselves. They definitely need to be questions and short and to the point. I'm going to ask one last question. So there's many areas, but I'll just focus on one, where Israel has really, where we progressives could learn lessons from, or Americans can learn lessons from Israel. Israel's military has been very inclusive for a very long time.
No, you have don't ask, don't tell. You had that, right?
Yes.
You know what we had? We don't care. Just don't care. It's not an issue.
It's been inclusive of women as well for a very long time. Are there lessons in that space? Are there lessons in that space for us in the United States that you can share with us?
Yeah, look, I think that Israel has women fighter pilots, navigators, in fighter aircraft. Israel has women combat soldiers.
Which we do not have yet.
Yeah, and they've proven themselves under fire a number of times, including, by the way, in the police. Unbelievable, unbelievable. And including in this last rash of knifings, just tremendous courage and tushia. Tushia. Dan, help me out. No, tushia is not poise. Tushia is something else. Tushia is what the young David does opposite Goliath. It's resourcefulness. There it is. There it is. Tremendous resourcefulness and courage. by...
I'll note neither ambassador had that.
Yeah, I'm very disappointed here.
Right.
You know. But amazing capabilities. I think, I'll tell you where I was deeply moved. I went to the Mossad. You're not going to meet these people. And they show me this cyber stuff, okay? And there's a 26-year-old young woman there. And I said, so tell me about yourself. And she says, well, I'm, graduated the Technion. She could be very wealthy. Yet she's working in the Mossad. And I said, why are you doing this? She says, because I believe in this country and this is what I can give. I'll have enough time later. And this woman is probably responsible for saving more lives than, than anybody could even imagine, okay? And this is something that you encounter. There's this human resource. I don't want to talk about it just in terms of utility, but there's heartwarming, and as Prime Minister, you see this. You see this in the special units, you see this in the police, you see this in the Mossad, you see this in the Shin Bet. From a moral point of view, it's the right thing to do. From the utilitarian point of view, you have to be crazy not to do it. And I think Israel is very sane and very moral in having this inclusivity of women in every part of life. There was a woman prime minister, as you know. It's fair game.
We may test that proposition ourselves. Great. I think we have time for questions. Can you identify yourself?
Prime Minister, good to see you. Dave Makowski.
The map drawer.
Washington Institute. I just want to ask you, you went, I think in June 2013, to Herzl's grave, who you venerate as every Israeli does, and you said the current situation is not good for Israel. If Israel wants to be a Jewish state, of course with equal rights for all citizens, it doesn't want to become a binational state. Obviously, the preference is a negotiated outcome. I think everyone in this room agrees to that. But what's the plan B, Mr. Prime Minister, if for the reasons you say, that the Palestinians aren't willing to reach that? What's Israel's plan B to remain a Jewish state and not slide and become a binational state? Thank you.
You want me to?
Yes, please.
Why don't we collect a few so I can think about that?
Okay. Questions?
Let me answer, Mr. Makowski. Look, unilateralism works less well than a negotiated solution. In any case, the main problem that we have is the acceptance of the principle that Israel will take care of security in the areas basically west of the Jordan. This is the main problem. The problem in Gaza, when we left Gaza, is that we left we not only took the settlers out, but we left no security there. As a result, Gaza has become a security threat not to the communities adjacent to Gaza or even to Beersheba or Ashdod. It's now become this poison thumb, this poison dagger that sends rockets well beyond Tel Aviv. It can reach Kiryat Shmona. So unless you have an Israeli capability to actually prevent the use of territories that we vacate in a civilian sense or hand over in a civilian sense, that we can patrol it from a security point of view, then that's where you get into trouble, okay? And there's another issue that came up that wasn't around in 2006, if you want to complicate things a little more, and that's tunneling. There's tunneling from Gaza into Israel, and the West Bank. Any delineation of a border would be hundreds of kilometers, and so you'd have thousands of tunnels. And these tunnels are terror tunnels from which terrorists can emerge and take people hostage or kill them, squirrel them back, You've got enormous problems. And the only way you can deal with that, the only way, is to ensure that from the security point of view, Israel has, for the foreseeable future, until you can prove otherwise, that there's somebody else who can responsibly take that territory, Israel has the security control. I don't see the Palestinians agreeing to that, okay? They say, well, how can we be, a fully sovereign state if we don't have security control of it? How can we leave a security presence of Israel for the indefinite future? And I said, well, ever hear of Germany or Okinawa or South Korea? You can if you need to. Because, see, no Israeli in his right mind, the reason I'm here for the fourth time is because just about every Israeli believes in what I'm about to tell you. Any deal or any arrangement, unilateral or negotiated, must have Israel maintain the ability to defend itself by itself against any threat, including from territories that are ceded. Okay? That's the most important provision. That is something that I don't see the Palestinians accepting now. Maybe they'll accept it tomorrow. Maybe Arab states will accept it. Maybe the international community will accept it. If they do, then I think we'll be able to ensure that we don't incorporate Palestinian populations in our midst, be able to separate from them, yet at the same time maintain security in our hands. That's the real test. And I'm not sure that, I think we have to talk about that more. I think we have to get that into the international bloodstream, because that's the basis of a practical solution in the Middle East, as it unfortunately will be for the next few years.
Right there. Billy, right there. Oh.
I'm Morton Halperin. I'm the chair of the board of J Street. And I wanted to ask you about your negotiating posture, which, as I understand it, is that you will negotiate without preconditions, but that in the negotiations you want these two issues that you've delineated settled before you would talk about other issues, or at least negotiate them. And I wonder whether you wouldn't consider, as a way to convince Arabs and Palestinians and others about your commitment to peace, to do two things. One is to give a sense of the generous borders that you said you would be willing to offer if these two things were settled, conditioned on them, but make clear what it was. And second, begin to show the Palestinians that they can have an autonomous existence even if they don't control the security arrangements, by beginning to allow them to have it now on the West Bank.
I think on the question of territories and borders, this is about 95% of what Israel has to cede. On the question of mutual recognition, that is recognition of a Jewish state, nation state of the Jewish people, and the security arrangements and so on, that's what we need on the other side. There's the question of the Jerusalem, and specifically the Temple Mount. I think it's insoluble. I mean, I just don't see right now a solution for that, and I think it has to remain under Israeli sovereignty, and that's the only way to prevent this from exploding into sectorial strife. But on these two issues, Israel is asked to give virtually 100% of its negotiating position without receiving a concomitant return. And I don't negotiate that way. But it's a point of fact that my predecessors who did negotiate differently fell off the cliff. They got nothing because they didn't really breach that rejectionism. Palestinian rejectionism, which has been around since the 1920s, has lately been fused with militant Islam, which makes it even worse. But in point of fact, I think these things should be put on the table together. And that was basically the position that people tried to have, but it's become more difficult with the current Palestinian leadership. I nevertheless say that I'm willing to meet Abu Mazen, because my late father used to say that, I'm translate this. You said that conversation fertilizes thought, okay?
That was our theory here.
Conversation fertilizes thought. So you actually can generate new ideas if you actually sit down and talk. I can't just get this guy to sit down and talk. And it's, you know, I suppose I could say today, my throat has become hoarse from inviting him to meet again and again and again, and he's refused. But you are right to draw the distinction between the willingness to sit down without any preconditions and what I believe are the two foundations, the two pillars of any potential deal: mutual recognition and long-term security arrangements where Israel is able to defend itself. They'd have their own terms. And I don't have to, he doesn't need to have me accept them in order to sit down. We should get on with it. Conversation fertilizes thought. We should sit down and converse.
Other questions? Right here.
Mr. Prime Minister, I'm Greg Rosenbaum. I chair the National Jewish Democratic Council and sit on the Economic Advisory Council here at CAP. I want to thank you for reaching out and being here with us at CAP today in the spirit of reconciling Americans of both political parties to focus on the shared values that unite us in support of Israel and not policy disagreements we have that could divide us. My question concerns economics and trade relations. As we all now know from the famous gefilte fish emails, it is not that easy to import product from Israel to the United States, and sometimes it's not that easy for Israel to import products from the United States. Since economic ties are, in my view, a very important part of security and the relationship between the two countries, does your administration have plans to streamline trade relations between the two countries in order to create a more robust exchange of goods and services in the future?
Yes, and I'm the Minister of the Economy, so I'm going to put that into effect. For the next few weeks, I'm the Minister of the Economy. So I'll make sure that we put into effect whatever. Look, I'm an open trader as far as I can. By the way, with the Arabs, with the Palestinians. I don't know if you're aware of this, but in the midst of these attacks, and they occur every few hours, there have been calls for me to effect closure on the territories. And I said, I think it's very important that we focus on the knife wielders and on the, the Molotov cocktail throwers, but not inflame the rest of the population. So about 140,000 Palestinian workers, I think that's the number, work in Israel every day. We kept the that open. Similarly in Gaza, people should, this is one of those amazing factoids, okay? So here's a factoid, okay? Gaza right now has had more than 1 million tons since the Gaza operation. 1 million tons of reconstruction material, humanitarian aid, economic goods. Those 1 million tons have been passed almost exclusively by Israel through the Israeli land border. Very little of it has gone through the other borders. In the sea, we don't want them to come through the sea, not because we care about passage, but we care about weapons, and you can smuggle them. Here we have containers that are scanned. We want more containers scanned. Egypt, how shall I say this, does not encourage a heavy flow into Gaza, okay? But we do. So we screen for weapons, but we've increased the flow. We used to boast that we have 250 trucks pass into Gaza daily. It's now 900. And if we get scanners from Germany and from Holland, as I've asked the leaders of those countries to supply, it can go up higher. So my position is let the, let 1,000 economies bloom. I think that's actually, it's not in lieu of a political settlement, but it helps. It helps. It helps that people in the West Bank and people in Gaza see that they're not living at the edge of a precipice, that they have the wherewithal to have a real life and businesses. That's easier to do in the West Bank. Part of the reason the West Bank has been relatively quiet. And, you know, let's work that to ensure that that continues, is that they look around and they say, do we want to be like Khalib, like Aleppo in Syria? Do we want to be like Yemen? Do we want to be like Libya? Or do we want to have a real life and a potential for a real solution down the line? So I don't know if we can solve the political problem right now, and I think President Obama has his own doubts as well, but I think we should work. There are three components here. There is the political component, a political solution, there's security, and there's prosperity. At the very least, we should work on security and prosperity as we are, and if we can, also advance the political solution. For that, we're going to have to sit down and talk. Unilateralism that Mr. Makovsky was pointing out to, I suppose that's possible too, but it would have to meet Israeli security criteria, and that would also require, I think, a broader international understanding than exists now.
Thank you. I think we unfortunately are over time. I really want to thank you for your remarks. Are there any final remarks you would like to make? I know your throat.
I'd like to make a lot of remarks, but, but I have something to declare. I have a sore throat.
I
want to thank you.
We are happy that your throat lasted. When this issue came up of hosting you, we all wanted to move forward because we believe progress is impossible without dialogue, as you said. So we're grateful for you to be here and take questions on a whole range of issues.
I'd like to make another suggestion.
Sure.
Invite me again.
We'll see. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, remain seated as the Minister and his delegation make their exit. Thank you.